You're not my real mother, are you? Emma stood in the sterile hospital corridor, clutching a blood-stained birth certificate she'd found hidden in Margaret's jewelry box. The woman who'd raised her for 23 years lay unconscious behind the glass door, machines beeping steadily, the result of another accident that Emma now realized wasn't an accident at all. The name on the certificate stared back at her. Mother, Sarah Mitchell Harrison. Father, David Harrison. But Margaret's maiden name was Collins. And Sarah. Sarah was supposed to be dead. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe for more heart-wrenching stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family. Like, comment, and share, because sometimes the greatest love comes from the most unexpected places. The blood on the kitchen floor told a different story than the one Margaret was trying to sell. I just slipped, Margaret whispered from her hospital bed, her left eye swollen shut, 3 stitches running along her cheekbone. You know how clumsy I get. Emma stared at her mother, the woman she'd called mother for 23 years, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Margaret had been clumsy a lot lately. Bruises that bloomed like dark flowers on her arms. A broken wrist from falling off a ladder. A concussion from walking into a door. But this time was different. This time, Emma had come home early from her marketing job and found Margaret collapsed in their small kitchen, unconscious, blood pooling beneath her head. The ladder she'd supposedly fallen from was nowhere to be seen. "Mum," Emma said softly, pulling the visitor's chair closer to the bed. "I found something." Margaret's one good eye fluttered nervously. "What do you mean?" Emma's hands shook as she pulled out the birth certificate, wrinkled, yellowed with age, and hidden in a secret compartment of Margaret's jewelry box that Emma had discovered while looking for her insurance cards. "This says my mother's name is Sarah Harrison. My father is David Harrison." Emma's voice cracked. "But your maiden name is Collins." The machines beeped faster. Margaret closed her eyes. For a long moment, the only sound was the mechanical breathing of the ventilator down the hall. "Where did you find that?" Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "Hidden. Like everything else." Emma leaned forward. "Mum, who is Sarah Harrison? And why do I have her name on my birth certificate?" A single tear rolled down Margaret's bruised cheek. "Because," she whispered, "she's the woman who stole you from me. 24 years earlier." Margaret Collins was 19 and believed in fairy tales. She stood in the marble foyer of the Harrison mansion, her worn suitcase in hand, marveling at the crystal chandelier that probably cost more than her family made in a year. The job posting had been simple. Live-in nanny needed for professional family. Must be discreet, reliable, and excellent with children. What it hadn't mentioned was how devastatingly handsome David Harrison would be. "You must be Margaret," he said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of smile that made her forget her own name. "Welcome to our home." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison." Margaret felt heat creep up her neck as his fingers lingered on hers. "Please, call me David." His eyes sparkled with mischief. "Mr. Harrison makes me sound old." From the top of the staircase, a voice called down, sharp, cold, cutting through the warmth like a blade. "David, stop flirting with the help." Sarah Harrison descended the stairs like a queen approaching her subjects. Tall, blonde, immaculate in a way that seemed effortless but probably took hours to achieve. Her lawyer's suit was tailored to perfection, her makeup flawless, her smile as warm as winter. "You must be Margaret," Sarah said, not bothering to extend her hand. "I trust you understand the importance of discretion in this household. Mr. Harrison's political career depends on maintaining our family's reputation." Margaret nodded eagerly. "Of course, Mrs. Harrison." "Good." Sarah's eyes swept over Margaret dismissively. "The children are upstairs. Emma is 3, Michael is 5. They've had difficulties with previous nannies. I trust you'll be different. As Sarah clicked away in her designer heels, David caught Margaret's arm gently. Don't mind her, he said softly. She's under a lot of pressure. The law firm, the campaign. It's not easy being married to someone in politics. Margaret felt her heart flutter at his touch. I understand, she whispered. What she didn't understand was that she'd just walked into a trap that would destroy her life. It started with late-night conversations. David would find Margaret in the kitchen after the children were asleep, making tea and grading correspondence for his campaign. He'd pour himself a scotch and sit across from her, asking about her day, her dreams, her thoughts on everything from foreign policy to favorite books. Sarah was never there. Sarah was always at the office, or networking events, or business dinners that didn't include wives, only the kind of women who could advance careers. She doesn't love me anymore, David confessed one night, his hand covering Margaret's on the kitchen table. I don't think she ever did. I was just useful. Margaret's heart broke for him. This beautiful, powerful man, so lonely in his perfect life. I'm sure that's not true, she whispered. Isn't it? He lifted her chin with his finger. When's the last time someone looked at me the way you do? Like I'm a person, not a stepping stone. The first kiss happened on a Tuesday. Margaret was folding laundry in the utility room when David appeared behind her, his hands on her waist, his lips on her neck. I can't stop thinking about you, he breathed against her skin. They made love against the washing machine while Sarah was at a deposition across town and the children napped upstairs. It was desperate, passionate, and everything Margaret had dreamed love would be. For 6 months, they met in secret. Stolen moments between his campaign events and her childcare duties. He promised her everything, that he'd leave Sarah after the election, that they'd be a real family, that he loved her more than he'd ever loved anyone. Margaret believed every word. She was young enough to think that love conquered all, naive enough to trust a man who whispered sweet lies while his wife slept upstairs. The night Sarah caught them changed everything. Margaret was in David's study, wearing only his campaign t-shirt, helping him prepare for a debate. Sarah was supposed to be in Chicago until Thursday. But Sarah had sensed something. Maybe it was the way David smiled at his phone. Maybe it was the way Margaret's eyes lit up when he entered a room. Maybe it was just a lawyer's instinct for deception. She found them tangled together on the leather couch, David's hands in Margaret's hair, Margaret's soft moans filling the air. Well, Sarah said calmly, standing in the doorway like she was witnessing nothing more scandalous than a chess game. This is convenient. David scrambled away from Margaret, grabbing his shirt. Sarah, I can explain. No need. Sarah's voice was ice. I've been expecting this. Margaret pulled a throw pillow over herself, tears of shame burning her eyes. Mrs. Harrison, I'm so sorry. Are you? Sarah stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Because I'm not. The words hung in the air like a challenge. You see, Sarah continued, perching on the edge of David's desk like she was about to deliver closing arguments, I've known about David's appetites for years. The secretaries, the campaign volunteers, the pretty young things who think they can save him from his cold, ambitious wife. David's face went white. Sarah. The difference is, Sarah said, her eyes locked on Margaret. This time, it's going to cost him everything. Margaret discovered she was pregnant on a Thursday. She stared at the 2 pink lines in the staff bathroom of the Harrison house, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the test. She was 20, unmarried, and carrying the child of a man who was married to someone else. But instead of panic, she felt joy. This was it. This was the sign that David had been waiting for. Now he'd have to choose. Now he'd have to leave Sarah and build a real life with her. She found him in his office, practicing a speech for the mayor's race. David, she whispered, closing the door behind her. I need to tell you something. He looked up, and for a moment, his face was soft with love. Then he saw her expression. What's wrong? I'm pregnant. The words fell between them like stones. David went very still. The color drained from his face, and Margaret watched as the man she loved transformed into a stranger. "Are you sure?" She nodded, pulling the test from her pocket. "I took 3. They were all positive." David stood slowly, running his hands through his hair. This can't happen. Not now. The election is in 6 months. If this gets out. It doesn't have to get out, Margaret said quickly. We can leave. Together. Start somewhere new. You said you loved me. You said you wanted a life with me. I did. I do. But. He turned away from her. The timing is impossible. Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest. The timing, or the scandal? Before David could answer, the office door opened. Sarah walked in, took one look at Margaret's tear-stained face and David's guilty expression, and smiled. "Well," she said pleasantly, "isn't this perfect timing?" Margaret would later realize that Sarah had been listening at the door. That nothing in the Harrison house happened without Sarah knowing about it first. "I assume congratulations are in order." Sarah's voice was syrup over broken glass. Margaret's throat closed. David said nothing. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah continued, settling into the chair behind David's desk like she owned not just the furniture, but the room and everyone in it. "Margaret, you're going to pack your things and leave. Tonight. David will provide a small settlement, enough to get you settled somewhere far away from here." "Sarah," David started. "You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement," Sarah continued, ignoring him. "You'll never contact this family again. You'll never mention David's name in connection with your child. And if you ever, try to interfere with our lives, I'll destroy you so completely that you'll wish you'd never been born." Margaret found her voice. "You can't just." "I can," Sarah said softly. "I'm a lawyer, dear. A very good one. With connections you can't imagine and resources you can't compete with. I could have you arrested for theft, for trespassing, for a dozen things I could fabricate and make stick. Or—" She leaned back in the chair. "You could take the money and go quietly." Margaret looked at David, waiting for him to speak, to defend her, to choose their child over his political ambitions. But David was staring at the floor, his hands clenched into fists, saying nothing. "How much?" Margaret whispered. $10,000, Sarah said. "More than generous for a nanny's severance." Margaret's child, child, was worth $10,000 and a signature on legal papers that would erase her from their lives forever. She took the money. She signed the papers. And she left that night, carrying nothing but a suitcase and the growing life inside her that no one wanted but her. Margaret gave birth to Emma on a Tuesday in March, alone in a small hospital 3 states away from the Harrison mansion. The labor lasted 14 hours. Margaret had no one to hold her hand, no one to tell her she was brave, no one to cut the cord or take pictures of those first precious moments. But when they placed Emma in her arms, tiny, perfect, with David's dark hair and Margaret's green eyes, none of that mattered. "Hello, my love," Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mummy. And I'm going to take such good care of you." She'd prepared everything. A small apartment, a job lined up at a local diner, a life where she and Emma could be happy and safe and far away from the Harrison family's poison. But complications during delivery left Margaret unconscious for 3 days. And in those 3 days, Sarah Harrison struck. Margaret woke to find her hospital bed surrounded by strangers, lawyers, social workers, a man in an expensive suit who claimed to represent the Harrison family's interests. "Where's my baby?" Margaret's voice was hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. The social worker, a thin woman with kind eyes and a clipboard, sat down gently beside the bed. "I'm sorry, Miss Collins. There were complications during delivery. The baby didn't survive." The words didn't make sense. Margaret had heard Emma cry. She'd held her, counted her tiny fingers, looked into her bright, alert eyes. "No," Margaret whispered. That's not. Where is she? Where's Emma? There was no Emma, the lawyer said smoothly. The infant was stillborn. I'm very sorry for your loss. Margaret tried to sit up, but her body was still weak from surgery. You're lying. She was alive. She was perfect. Where is my daughter? Miss Collins, the social worker said gently, I know this is difficult to accept. Sometimes after traumatic births, mothers can experience hallucinations. I'm not hallucinating. Margaret screamed, ripping the paw from her arm. Someone stole my baby. But the paperwork was perfect. The death certificate was signed by a doctor Margaret had never met. The cremation had already taken place. No body to examine, no proof that Emma had ever existed. Margaret spent the next 2 months in psychiatric care, everyone convinced she was delusional about her dead baby. The grief counselors spoke in soft voices about acceptance and moving on. The psychiatrists prescribed pills that made her mind fuzzy and her memories unclear. But one night, a nurse named Linda sat down beside Margaret's bed. You're not crazy, Linda whispered, glancing around to make sure they were alone. I was there that night. I saw them take your baby. Margaret's heart stopped. What? A woman came. Blonde, expensive clothes, talked like she owned the world. She had paperwork, said she was adopting the baby. Had a doctor with her who signed off on everything. Linda's voice shook. I tried to ask questions, but she said it was all legal. Had the signatures, the court orders, but something felt wrong. Who was she? Margaret gripped Linda's hand. She said her name was Sarah Harrison. Said the baby was going to a good home where she'd have everything she needed. Sarah had stolen Emma. Not just stolen her, planned to steal her. While Margaret was signing non-disclosure agreements and packing her suitcase, Sarah had been working with lawyers and doctors and social workers, building a web of legal documents that would let her take Emma the moment she was born. Margaret checked herself out of the psychiatric facility the next morning and began her hunt. It took Margaret 6 months to track them down. 6 months of private investigators she couldn't afford, court records she had to fight to access, and a paper trail that led from hospital records to adoption agencies to a new address in Connecticut. David and Sarah had moved across the country. He dropped out of the mayor's race. Too many questions about his sudden departure, too many rumors about his personal life. They'd bought a house in an upscale suburb where no one knew their history. And they were raising Emma as their own daughter. Margaret rented a tiny apartment across town and got a job at a coffee shop where she could watch and wait and plan. Every day after work, she'd drive to their neighborhood and park across from their house, just to catch glimpses of her daughter. Emma was walking now, taking unsteady steps across their perfectly manicured lawn while David laughed and cheered her on. She had his dark hair in pigtails, wore expensive little dresses, carried toys that cost more than Margaret made in a week. And Sarah. Sarah was the picture of motherhood. Pushing Emma on the swing set in their backyard, reading her bedtime stories through the window Margaret could see from the street, taking her to Mommy and Me classes in the neighborhood. To anyone watching, they looked like the perfect family. But Margaret knew the truth. She'd seen how Sarah treated people she considered beneath her. She'd witnessed the cruelty behind Sarah's smile. What would happen to Emma when she got older? When she started asking questions or showing independence? When she stopped being a useful prop in Sarah's perfect life? Margaret couldn't leave her daughter in that house. But she also couldn't just take her, not without proof of what Sarah had done, not without a legal case that would hold up in court. So Margaret did the only thing she could do. She applied for a job as Emma's nanny. I'm looking for steady work with a good family, Margaret told Sarah during the interview, her voice carefully modulated to hide any trace of recognition. I have experience with toddlers, and I'm very discreet. Sarah looked older than Margaret remembered. Lines around her eyes, a hardness to her mouth that hadn't been there before. Motherhood hadn't softened her. If anything, it had made her sharper. References? Sarah asked, not looking up from Margaret's fake resume. Margaret had spent months building her new identity. Margaret Harrison, claiming to be David's distant cousin from his father's side, someone who'd moved to Connecticut for a fresh start. The backstory was simple and believable, with just enough family connection to explain any resemblance Emma might see. Of course. Margaret handed over letters from employers who didn't exist, phone numbers that led to friends who'd been carefully coached on what to say. And you understand that this position requires absolute discretion? Mr. Harrison is considering a return to politics. We can't have our private life becoming public entertainment. I understand completely. Sarah hired her on the spot. That first day, when Margaret walked into the Harrison house and saw Emma, Emma, playing with blocks in the living room, it took everything she had not to drop to her knees and gather her daughter into her arms. Emma was beautiful. 2 years old, with David's dark eyes and Margaret's stubborn chin, wearing a little pink dress that probably cost more than Margaret's rent. Emma, Sarah said coolly, this is Margaret. She's going to be taking care of you while Mommy's at work. Emma looked up at Margaret with curious eyes, then held up a wooden block. Pretty, Emma said, her first word to her real mother. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Yes, sweetheart. Very pretty. For the next 3 years, Margaret raised her own daughter as a stranger. She watched Emma take her first real steps, heard her first complete sentences, taught her to tie her shoes and ride a tricycle and sing lullabies that Margaret's own mother had sung to her. But Emma called Sarah Mommy and Margaret was just Maggie, the nice lady who made snacks and read bedtime stories and stayed with her when the people she thought were her parents were too busy with their important lives. It was the sweetest torture imaginable. Margaret loved every moment with Emma and grieved every moment she couldn't claim her. She celebrated Emma's birthdays knowing she should have been the one receiving hugs and kisses. She soothed Emma's nightmares and cleaned her scraped knees and taught her to be kind and brave and strong. And slowly, Sarah began to notice how much Emma preferred her nanny to her mother. It started with small cruelties. Sarah would accidentally spill coffee on Margaret's clothes, forget to pay her on time, make cutting comments about Margaret's appearance or intelligence in front of Emma. Maggie's not very smart, is she, Emma? Sarah would say with a laugh that had edges. That's why she takes care of other people's children instead of having her own. Margaret bore it in silence because leaving would mean abandoning Emma to Sarah's growing resentment. The physical abuse began when Emma was 5. Margaret was helping Emma with a puzzle when Sarah came home from a particularly bad day at work. She'd lost a major case, been passed over for partner again, and David had called to say he'd be working late, again. She's not supposed to be playing, Sarah snapped, seeing Emma and Margaret on the living room floor. It's bath time. We were just finishing up, Margaret said gently, helping Emma put the last piece in place. When I say it's bath time, it's bath time. Sarah's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Emma looked between the two women, sensing tension she was too young to understand. Can Maggie help with my bath? No, Sarah said coldly. Maggie needs to learn to follow instructions. She grabbed Margaret's arm, her manicured nails digging into skin. Kitchen. Now. In the kitchen, away from Emma's eyes, Sarah's mask dropped completely. You're overstepping, she hissed, her grip tightening. Emma is my daughter. Not yours. You're the help. Start acting like it. She pushed Margaret backward, hard enough that Margaret stumbled into the counter, her hip catching the sharp edge. Do you understand me? Margaret nodded, pressing her hand to her side where a bruise was already forming. Good. And Margaret, if you ever make me look bad in front of my daughter again, you'll find yourself looking for a new job. And good luck explaining to your next employer why you were fired for inappropriate behavior with a child. The threat was clear. Sarah would destroy Margaret's reputation, make it impossible for her to work with children ever again, ensure she could never get close to Emma or any other child who might need her protection. So Margaret stayed. And endured. And learned to hide the bruises that bloomed like dark flowers across her skin whenever Sarah's frustrations needed an outlet. Because Emma needed her. Because no one else would protect her daughter from the woman who'd stolen her. Because sometimes love means taking the beating so someone else doesn't have to. Present day. Emma stared at Margaret's sleeping form in the hospital bed, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. The accidents that happened whenever Emma and Margaret got too close. The way Margaret always deflected praise, always insisted that Sarah was Emma's real mother. The sadness in Margaret's eyes during every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every moment when Emma ran to Sarah for comfort instead of the woman who actually loved her. Emma pulled out her phone and called the private investigator whose number she'd found in Margaret's papers. James Mitchell, a gruff voice answered. This is Emma Harrison. You've been working for Margaret Collins. A pause. Are you calling on her behalf? She's in the hospital. I found your files. I know everything. Emma's voice shook. I need to see all of it. Everything you found. They met that afternoon in a diner across from the hospital. James Mitchell was older than Emma had expected, with kind eyes and the careful manner of someone who delivered difficult news before. She hired me 5 years ago, he said, sliding a thick folder across the table. Wanted me to document everything. The adoption fraud, the abuse, all of it. Said she needed evidence in case something happened to her. Emma opened the folder with trembling hands. Birth certificates. DNA tests proving Margaret was her biological mother. Court records showing the illegal adoption. Medical records documenting years of accidents that formed a clear pattern of abuse. And videos. Dozens of them, taken with hidden cameras Margaret had placed throughout the house. Emma watched in horror as Sarah slammed Margaret into walls, pushed her downstairs, held her hand over a burning stove while hissing threats. All while Emma was at school or asleep, never knowing that the woman she called mother was systematically torturing the woman who actually loved her. Why didn't she use these? Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. She was terrified Sarah would disappear with you if she pressed charges. Sarah's a lawyer. She knows how to work the system. Margaret thought it was better to endure the abuse than risk losing you completely. Emma felt sick. For 23 years, Margaret had sacrificed everything, her identity, her relationship with her daughter, her safety, her sanity, to stay close to Emma. To protect her from the woman who'd stolen her. There's one more thing, James said gently, pulling out a final envelope. She made me promise to give this to you if anything ever happened to her. Inside was a letter in Margaret's careful handwriting. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then you finally know the truth. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry for all the lies, all the pretending, all the years I let you think I was just your nanny when I was actually your mother. I stayed because I couldn't bear to leave you with her. I took the beatings because I knew that if I fought back, if I pressed charges, Sarah would take you somewhere I could never find you. And a world without you in it wasn't a world I could survive. You are the best thing I ever did. Every smile, every hug, every moment I got to watch you grow up was worth every bruise, every cruel word, every night I cried myself to sleep missing the daughter who was right there but could never really be mine. I love you, Emma. I have loved you since the moment they placed you in my arms, and I will love you until the day I die. You are my heart walking around outside my body, my reason for breathing, my greatest joy. Be happy, my darling girl. Be free. Be everything I always knew you could be. All my love forever. Mum. Emma was sobbing so hard she could barely see the words. She looked up at James through her tears. I have to make this right. What are you going to do? Emma wiped her eyes, steel entering her voice. I'm going to end this. Tonight. Emma found Sarah in the Home Office, working late as always, a glass of wine at her elbow and legal briefs scattered across the desk. We need to talk, Emma said, closing the door behind her. Sarah looked up with mild irritation. Can't it wait? I have a deposition in the morning. About Margaret. Emma's voice was steady now, calm in the way that comes after a storm. About what you did to her. To me. To us. Sarah went very still. I don't know what you mean. Emma pulled out the birth certificate, the DNA results, the adoption records. She spread them across Sarah's desk like evidence in a trial. I know everything, Emma said quietly. I know you stole me from my real mother. I know you've been abusing her for years to keep her quiet. I know about the illegal adoption, the forged death certificate, all of it. Sarah's face cycled through emotions, surprise, calculation, and finally, cold fury. You don't understand what you're talking about, she said, standing slowly. Margaret Collins is a delusional woman who's been feeding you lies. I have videos, Sarah. Hours of them. Margaret documented everything. Emma's voice was steel. I watched you push her down the stairs. I watched you burn her hand on the stove. I watched you threaten to kill her if she ever told me the truth. Sarah's mask finally dropped completely. The controlled lawyer disappeared, replaced by something ugly and desperate. You ungrateful little bitch, she snarled. Do you have any idea what I've given you? The life you've had? The opportunities? The education? You would have grown up in poverty with that pathetic girl. That pathetic girl is my mother, Emma said, her voice rising. And you tortured her for years while she protected me from you. Protected you. Sarah laughed, sharp and bitter. I saved you. From a life of struggle, of mediocrity, of being nobody. I made you somebody. You made me a lie. Sarah moved around the desk, her eyes wild. Everything you are is because of me. Your education, your job, your apartment, I paid for all of it. You owe me everything. I owe you nothing. Emma stood her ground as Sarah approached. You're not my mother. You never were. You're just the woman who stole me. Sarah raised her hand to slap Emma, but Emma caught her wrist. I'm not a child anymore, Emma said quietly. And I'm not Margaret. I won't let you hurt me the way you hurt her. Sarah wrenched her arm free, backing toward the desk where she kept her letter opener. You want to know the truth. Sarah's voice was venomous now. Your precious Margaret was nothing. A stupid girl who spread her legs for a married man and thought he'd leave me for her. She got exactly what she deserved. And what about me? Emma asked. What did I deserve? You deserved better than her, Sarah spat. You deserved a mother who could give you everything, not some pathetic nanny who... The office door burst open. Margaret stood in the doorway, pale from her hospital escape but steady on her feet. She'd heard everything. That's enough, Margaret said quietly. Sarah whirled around, and for a moment, Emma saw pure hatred flash across her face. You, Sarah breathed. You should be dead. Maybe, Margaret said, stepping into the room. But I'm not. And Emma knows the truth now. The truth. Sarah grabbed the letter opener from the desk. The truth is that you're nothing. You've always been nothing. A servant, a nanny, a woman so pathetic she let me beat her for years just to stay close to a child who isn't even hers anymore. She is mine, Margaret said simply. She's always been mine. Love made her mine, not legal papers. Sarah lunged forward with the letter opener, but Emma stepped between them, catching Sarah's wrist again. Enough, Emma said firmly. It's over. Sarah struggled against Emma's grip, desperation making her strong. She's poisoned you against me. I'm your mother. I raised you. I love you. You don't know what love is, Emma said sadly. Love doesn't steal. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't hurt the people who can't fight back. Sarah collapsed then, the fight going out of her all at once. She sank into her chair, the letter opener clattering to the floor. I couldn't have children, she whispered, and for the first time, Emma heard something real in her voice. Years of trying, of procedures, of failures. And then David. David was going to have a baby with her. With someone who didn't deserve it, didn't want it the way I did. So you took her, Margaret said softly. I saved her, Sarah insisted, but the conviction was gone from her voice. I gave her everything. Everything except the truth, Emma said. Everything except her real mother's love. Sarah looked up at Emma with eyes that were suddenly very old and very tired. I did love you, she whispered. In my way. As much as I could. I know, Emma said gently. But it wasn't enough. And it wasn't real. Emma called the police while Margaret sat with Sarah, who seemed to have aged a decade in the space of an hour. There was no more fight left in her, no more schemes or threats or manipulations. Just a broken woman who'd convinced herself that stealing someone else's life was the same as building her own. When they came to arrest Sarah for fraud, kidnapping, and assault, she went quietly. At the door, she turned back to look at Emma one last time. I'm sorry, she said, and for once, Emma believed she meant it. But sorry couldn't give back the years. Sorry couldn't heal the scars on Margaret's body or the trauma in Emma's heart. Sorry couldn't undo 23 years of lies. Emma closed the door and turned to Margaret, who was standing in the hallway looking lost. Mum, Emma said softly. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. You don't have to call me that. I know it's confusing, I know this is all. Emma crossed the room and pulled Margaret into her arms, holding her tight. Mum, she said again, and felt Margaret's tears against her shoulder. I've been waiting 23 years to say that and mean it. They held each other in the hallway of the house that had been their prison, surrounded by the debris of Sarah's lies, and finally, they were free. 6 months later, Emma sat beside Margaret's hospital bed, a different hospital this time, where Margaret was receiving treatment for the cancer she'd hidden for 2 years. You should have told me, Emma said, holding Margaret's thin hand. I couldn't bear to worry you, Margaret replied. After everything you'd been through, I wanted to give you time to heal. We heal together now, Emma said firmly. No more secrets. No more protecting me from the truth. Margaret smiled, the real smile Emma remembered from childhood, when she thought Margaret was just the nice nanny who made the best pancakes and gave the best hugs. I have something for you, Margaret said, reaching into her bedside drawer. She pulled out a small wooden jewelry box, carved with flowers. Emma opened it to find a simple gold locket. Inside was a picture of Margaret holding a newborn baby. That's you, Margaret whispered. The day you were born. Before everything. I kept it all these years, hoping someday I could give it to you. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she fastened the locket around her neck. I love you, she whispered. I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. You have nothing to be sorry for, Margaret said, squeezing her hand. You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how. But now we're family, Emma finished. Really, truly family. Margaret's treatment was successful. The cancer, caught early enough, responded well to chemotherapy. Emma took leave from her job to care for Margaret, just as Margaret had spent years caring for her. They moved to a small cottage by the sea, far from the Harrison house and its ghosts. Emma legally changed her name to Emma Collins, finally claiming the identity that had always been hers. David tried to contact them once, a lawyer's letter expressing his regret for the situation and offering a financial settlement in exchange for their silence. Emma burned the letter without reading it to Margaret. Some people didn't deserve forgiveness, no matter how much time passed. Sarah was sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud and assault. Her law license was revoked, her reputation destroyed. Emma felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only sadness for the broken woman who'd convinced herself that love could be stolen instead of earned. On Margaret's 50th birthday, Emma presented her with adoption papers. What's this? Margaret asked, confused. I'm adopting you, Emma said with a grin. Officially making you my mother. It's ridiculous and unnecessary and completely legal. Margaret laughed until she cried. You can't adopt your own mother, darling. Watch me, Emma said. We're going to do this right this time. No lies, no secrets, no one else's names on the papers. Just us. They signed the papers in front of a judge who smiled through the entire proceeding, moved by the story of a mother and daughter who'd found their way back to each other despite everything the world had thrown at them. That night, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset over the ocean, Margaret asked the question that had haunted her for 23 years. Do you think you can ever really forgive me? For not fighting harder? For letting her take you? Emma was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the woman who'd sacrificed everything to stay close to her, who'd taken beatings and abuse and years of heartbreak just to make sure Emma was safe. Mum, she said finally, there's nothing to forgive. You did what love does. You stayed. You protected me the only way you could. You took the beatings so I wouldn't have to. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, the good kind this time, the kind that came from joy instead of pain. I'd do it all again, Margaret whispered. Every bruise, every lie, every moment of heartbreak. If it meant keeping you safe, I'd do it all again. I know, Emma said, taking her mother's hand. That's how I know you really are my mum. Not because of DNA or birth certificates or legal papers. Because you loved me enough to stay, even when staying nearly destroyed you. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, two women who'd survived everything the world could throw at them and found their way home to each other. Margaret had been right, all those years ago when she'd whispered to her newborn daughter that she'd take care of her. She'd kept that promise, even when it cost her everything. And now, finally, they were both free. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about romance, they're about sacrifice. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who never get knocked down, they're the ones who get back up every time, not for themselves, but for the people they love. Margaret Collins took 23 years of beatings, lies, and heartbreak to protect her daughter. She loved quietly, fiercely, and without recognition. She was never the mother on paper, but she was always the mother in her heart. And sometimes, that's the only thing that matters. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because everyone deserves to know that real love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it sacrifices, and sometimes it endures in silence until the truth can finally be told. Share this story with someone who needs to know that love comes in many forms, and the strongest love of all is the kind that stays, even when leaving would be easier. Remember, the woman who raises you might not be the woman who gave birth to you, but love makes a mother, not biology.